Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I'm back. You've seen a lot of me. I am here with Priti. She is another amazing TTP student who absolutely crushed the GMAT. She scored a 770 in only 4 weeks, so we'll be hearing a lot about that timeline. Quant 51, so can't do any better than that, and an awesome verbal 45. So welcome, Preeti. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here.
Great. So, as everybody likes to know as we start off these interviews, I think it'll be really helpful to get a sense of your background, where you came from as a student and all of that stuff so they can see kind of where this whole thing started. So, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit more about me. Hi, first of all, good to you all for joining. Uh, my name is Priti, and I'm born and raised in New Jersey. So from the U.S., I actually didn't realize when I was growing up, but I actually ended up growing up about 10 minutes down the road from my future alma mater, which is Rutgers University. So I studied at Rutgers, and I did industrial and systems engineering with a minor in business. So my background is definitely very quant heavy. Industrial and systems engineering is all based on mostly probability and statistics, but it kind of allowed me to prepare for my future career of consulting, where I can apply a lot of those skills of basically understanding and applying data, and then, of course, methodologies for improving efficiency and things like that for systems. So currently, I work at Deloitte. I'm a government and public services consultant, and I work with clients across the government space, so federal health, civil government, defense, across the board, and work mostly on tech consulting projects. So it allows me to kind of stretch those technical skills while also doing strategy work, which is where my interest lies a little bit more so. And outside of all of that, a little bit more about me is I'm a huge soccer fan. So go Real Madrid. A little sad weekend with the U.S. women's losing.
Yes, was
Did not.
sad. Agreed. All right, well, that's great. I know obviously you have a very kind of unique GMAT story, and this will be interesting. And I would say there are some people who do fall in your bucket of being in a pretty solid place to begin with. And let's talk about that. How did your GMAT prep start out? What were kind of the steps you initially took um, as far as getting moving with your GMAT preparation?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of my GMAT journey, so you could say it's approximately about a year in the making. Last year, I participated in the Forte program, the MBA launch program, if anyone's aware. So it's a great program. If you all don't know about it, it really helps prepare folks who are newer to the MBA process, which I was first in my family to get a MBA. So really trying to figure it
Yeah.
all out. But as part of that, they one of the requirements, I guess you could say, was to take the GMAT. So even though I wasn't planning on applying last year, I knew I needed to have one done by the end of that program, which is in August. So I took the GMAT with very little prep. I spent essentially, you could say, like a week really just reviewing basic strategies. I hadn't thought about grammar and things like that probably since
Yeah.
high school. So sat down and just reviewed the formulas and took the exam just kind of cold. I took it at the test center. Didn't really expect to perform very well. I was shocked when I got out of it. I remember calling my mom and saying, like, this feels kind of like a joke when I saw the score show up on screen. I was like, this doesn't seem right. But it was good to have that in my back pocket. It definitely was very motivational to know that I was able to score well even without prep. So it made me feel that if I did a little bit more, of a concerted effort, I might be able to sufficiently improve my score. But that was about a year ago. And in the interim, I guess you could say that I've been studying, but the reality of it is that I don't think I had a good strategy. So what I was essentially doing was doing problems out of the official guide, if you all know the official guide that
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
it's a great book. The questions are great. They're challenging. I think they very much reflect what the actual exam is like, but they're all kind of jumbled up. And so even when I would maybe struggle with a certain problem in probability, maybe I'd get the next probability problem in 20 questions. And really the skills that I may have learned, I honestly could have forgotten by then. Or if I study one day on a Saturday, by the next Saturday, the reality of it is even though I did the problem and I might remember, it was still very iffy. So I don't think that I was making progress in that time. I was also very busy. I was on two projects at work,
Right.
over as it does. So That's kind of what took me up to essentially, June of this year.
Okay. And so there's a couple interesting things, and I forgot to mention, if anyone has questions as we're kind of going through this interview, throw them in the chat box, and we'll definitely answer them in real time. So you took your initial test, and this isn't something any you guys have to do. You took it at a test center.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. And w- what was your score of that first test? Was it a joke in a good way or a bad way?
No, no. Oh, sorry. Yes, it was a joke in a good way. My bad. I got a
Yeah.
7. I have the post in front of me. I don't quite remember the
y-
score. So I got a
Right, that's
41,
what I thought. Okay, because you sent it to
41
me too.
quant. Yeah. So 710 was my score. So joke in a good way because I didn't expect well at all.
Right. Okay, so that's really interesting. So, and again, some of you here may be in this boat, and you may be at a point where you're that good early on. Um, and if you are, then you'll hear a lot of what Preeti has to say, and it'll resonate with you. Now, look, what she did was amazing. Let's clarify that. Most folks who just dive in, including myself, I don't want to say how many years ago because it'll age me pretty well, but many years ago, taking my first practice GMAT, I took it out, one just a practice one. I didn't do it at a test center. It didn't go well, so that was the joke for me. So yeah, you may need to study more than that. But the other thing I was going to say is, while you can take one at a test center to get a diagnostic under your belt, or a test under your belt, you can also take the MBA.com practice exam. It obviously worked out well for you because you got a 710, and as you said, you were able to keep that in your back pocket. So, and again, that was, so you took that and then you studied on and off up to a year. And during that year, that was including TTP, or eventually TTP kind of came into your life. How did that work?
So eventually TTP came into my life. Like I said, I didn't really have a strategy. I think I was focusing more on, everything else that was going on with the whole MBA process, like learning about schools and all that. And I knew that the GMAT was something I needed to get done in this time frame. But it
Right.
really until about probably late April of this year where I realized that I needed to have more of a plan in place, more of a process in place. So around that time is when I found out about TTP and I signed up and around late April. And I planned on doing a little bit more of it in that initial 2 month span, but I ended up having a lot of travel for work and then to visit family, and it just didn't really pan out. But once I got to the month of June, so my birthday is right at the end of May, I basically
Right.
told myself I need to stop kicking the can down the road. I need to get this done. And
Yes.
basically the month of June up until July 6th was my study time frame. So right around the 4 week span, there were days off in between where I had family stuff going on. But yeah, that was my real study time frame.
Right. And that's another really important thing. I've seen a lot of students do this. I see it a lot, especially with students who even try to study for this thing in college, because they gear up, they're very excited to do it, and then they let other stuff get in the way. Now, obviously, you have a career and a job, so those are, higher level responsibilities. But the idea of kicking the can down the road is very real. It's very real because we all have lives and we have responsibilities. Now, the younger you are, hopefully, the less responsibilities you have. The older you are, you have more. But either way, we allow those responsibilities to kind of get in the way, as you are indicating. So, for anyone out there, that's very important to hear, because at some point, if you want to do this thing with the GMAT, especially if your starting score isn't a 710, let's say it's a 510, right? And you still want to get a 740 plus, yeah, you're going to have to kind of figure it out, map out a schedule, and just make it work. And I know some people have more demanding jobs than others, but that's key, because if you do keep kicking that can down the road, I mean, in your situation, it's quite possible that you would have not even been ready for round one deadlines of this year. I mean, is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of knew or realized that July was basically my last shot. I wanted to have a
Right.
decent prepare for my round one applications, and 2 months is a good amount. So yeah, essentially I needed to buckle down on that time. But what I will also say is, well, first of all, take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. Everything works differently with different folks. But in my opinion, I learned from when I was taking the SAT and ACT in high school that I work better when I've got a more set timeline. So when I
Right.
do studying, which is what I did for the SAT, I actually got the exact same score twice, like 4 months apart, despite how much studying I did in between.
Yeah.
But when I sat down for the ACT and I basically studied for 2 weeks straight, where every free hour, basically what I did for the GMAT, every free hour spending on the ACT, I got a better score. So for me, I knew that if I buckled down for a month, this would be my time. But if you all know that, you've got other things going on in life. I'm 25, so I don't really have a lot going on outside of
Nice.
work curricular. So if you all know that that's the case, then maybe setting aside 3 months and having a more regular schedule would probably be a better, for you.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things you also said that I think is important, and again, this goes for any timeline, any student, is having a study schedule that's organized, right? Like as you said, the official guide in the way that we kind of recommend the OG is when you get done with TTP, if you want to do mixed practice sets, open up the book, set a timer, 20 minutes, 10 questions, review, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. But that's not like an organized schedule. That's a bunch of random questions, which is what you saw. So that's where I'm sure the target test prep study plan helped you. Um, and we do have some questions. I'll get to them in a second. But so how did you? Obviously, we have a set study plan. There's no way you did the whole thing in 4 weeks. You probably, or the advice I would have given you is pick and choose your spots and follow it because you're at a 710. Is that kind of what you did, following the order, but understanding what you know versus what you don't know?
So that is not what I did. But that's also because I know myself. And yes, there were certain topics that I knew I needed to work on. For example, since I was a child, probability has always been a tough topic. Like, I knew that would be something I need to spend a little bit more time on. But I also knew that I can be prone to silly mistakes. Sometimes I'll move too fast and I'll kind of overlook, whatever I need to do, that last step, or really rereading the problem. So
Right.
what I actually did is I did the accelerated study plan, and I did basically all of that in those 4 weeks. So I've got I brought props. This is my sticky note that has the different squares
Oh,
for the
nice.
lessons, and I colored it in whenever I would finish a lesson. And so that, I will say, in terms of timeline, though, I was studying on weekdays. I was basically doing 8 hours on top of my regular, like,
Oh,
eight
wow.
job. And
Okay.
I was doing like 12 to 16 hours. So I was basically spending literally every free hour. I didn't see my friends essentially for a month. So I made a lot of sacrifices. And like I said, if that's not the kind of person you are, don't do that. But for me, that ended up working for me because my brain was basically all GMAT all the time. But for some
Right.
people,
And yeah. Yeah, and the accelerated study plan is a good option too. So that would have been kind of my next thing to mention to you if we were discussing this personally. And I'm guessing it probably felt very good every time you filled in a square. I'm sure you got a lot of joy out of that. I can imagine that looks like it would be very rewarding each time because you're moving on. And my guess is when you were using the accelerated plan, you were probably going back and reading where you were weak after doing certain chapter tests, right?
yes. So for quant, I didn't really go back and read too much because thankfully I'm a little bit stronger in quant. So I didn't feel like
Right.
I had to review the lessons unless it was something really specific, like when they have inscribed. Well, I don't remember anything about that, but for the most
Right.
part, it would start to come back to me. But for verbal, I read every lesson because I needed to do that review. I'm not the strongest in reading comprehension, sentence correction, so reading the lessons really helped me there. But I tried to do pretty much every practice problem available. Like I tried to do all the easy, medium, hard tests. I
Good.
think because geometry had like 20, so I did maybe 15. But
Yeah,
for the
there's a
most
lot.
part, doing all of that, drilling that, I think it really is what made the difference and allowed me to kind of really improve upon the score because I was getting the bulk of my knowledge fixed in a certain time frame, and then they would have the review test to remind me every so often.
Yep. I mean, in look, the accelerated plan to reiterate and be clear, because I know some of the folks watching this live and will be watching it are using TTP. It is meant for somebody in Priti's situation where she's at a 710. She knows quant, like she knew that she knew quant well. And so yeah, just be very careful. If you're at a 550, you don't want to mimic that. You probably need to go through the TTP study plan. So just keep that in mind. Now, there are some questions. Someone asked, I'm consistently getting a 49 in quant, but can't improve in verbal. Any advice? So I'm sure you have a few things to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I also understand that I consistently perform way better in quant than I did in verbal throughout any of my practice. And I will also know in my practice, I wasn't scoring as high as my first exam. So when I say it kind of felt like a fluke, it really did. For me, I think what kind of pushed the bounds on that last verbal score was really understanding the concepts. I think before, when I was initially studying, I was just trying to understand enough so that I could figure out the problem when they were in front of me. But once I sat down and actually tried to understand the theories and the reasons why, certain idioms are correct and the reasons why certain sentences have to be structured in a certain way, things started to make more sense. So I think cutting the corners for me didn't really work in improving my score. But once I actually understood the concepts, before just how to apply it, I think that allowed me to apply it a lot easier. So I wasn't really looking for how do I solve this problem and knock out answer choice. It was like, what is the sentence really trying to tell me, and how can
Right.
I make it clear?
Good. Yeah, and as you said, the nice thing is you did go through the entirety of the verbal, so that was probably a nice mix for you. Now, I guess this is just a general question. How about people applying to M7, other U.S. business schools at, imagine you mean, well, actually, I don't know what you mean, either 33 or 38 years of age. You said 338. So I will guess you meant 38, but with a credible GMAT. Well, you're 25 and you're not in admissions. Obviously, you're younger than 38. I would say that if the shoe fits, it's fine. Sometimes we do hear that if you're at 38, it might make more sense for an executive MBA, even a part time MBA. But a lot of that depends on where you're at in the stage of your career. And eh, you had a lot of advice because you had your people over at Forte. I'm sure you leaned on them. You work for Deloitte. I'm sure there's tons of people at Deloitte you can talk to who've gotten their MBAs. Um, I'm sure you would agree that reaching out to admissions and people in the know is probably a wise move. I mean, did you do a lot of that as you were preparing? Well, I guess you're applying this year round one, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you probably spoke to a lot of people when you were deciding on the schools and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely reached out to a lot of folks at my job. I think another thing that I is a little underrated, but reaching out to folks that you have any connection to, I think tends to be a big icebreaker. So I look for a lot of
Yes.
folks who have the same undergrad as me, studied the same thing,
Yes.
opened a lot of doors. But I think advice was the biggest thing for me to help me figure out whether or not business school was right for me, whether this is the right time, what schools I might enjoy most would, best help me reach my future goals. So I think talking to folks, I can't underestimate it enough. I think a lot of folks helped me get to where I am now, and I'm sure in the future I want to help other folks get to hopefully where I'll be. So I think that's the best
Yeah.
way.
I agree 100%. I'm a huge proponent. Back in the day when I was networking, actually for business school and for jobs, I would reach out to people at my alma mater, and they'd always be happy to talk because I was like, actually, I was around your age. I was 25, 26, and they were probably, I guess, maybe around the age I am now. And yeah, they were more than happy to provide advice, like what the NBA did for them, how they got to their NBA. So, yeah, if you're ever wondering, I mean, you can definitely go out to admissions and talk to them. You can talk to consultants, but then you can also just talk to regular people who've gotten their MBAs. But I think in this day and age, and age isn't the main factor. It's about what your profile looks like along with your age, and then whether or not all of that together makes sense. So that would be my advice. But I'm not in admissions, but that's just what I've seen over the years. Another question. What was Preeti's time strategy? She went through it. She went pedal to the metal for, she said 3 months, right? Or a
For
month, 4
about
weeks, right?
5 weeks.
Oh yeah, right. It took you time to get into gear, right? And for her, as she said, that worked. She kind of cut off her social stuff, probably, didn't cut off her job stuff. I think you said you're studying 8 hours a day
Yeah,
on
on
top of
work.
work.
Yeah, I was doing 2.5 before and 5.5 or more after work. It was,
O-
yeah, a lot.
Okay. So in a 24-hour day, I mean, that means what? You were sleeping for 6 hours?
Six or less. Yeah, another
All right.
strategy not recommend. I would
It
say
works
on
for you. Right.
my time strategy, I think that for most people, I think in hindsight, I think I would have studied and possibly even performed better if I was also focusing on all the other holistic parts of my health. So I'm talking about being physically active. I usually like going on 6 mile walks. The lack of
Wow.
that, and like I really felt like I was missing out on something when I didn't have that walk. Because I sometimes when I had an opportunity to go and I could fit it in, I was usually thinking about the GMAT. So I could have multitasked if I
Right.
had the
That's what I
opportunity.
was thinking. Did you ever like, well, wow, six, so 6 mile walks. I mean, I can see how you can do it in Manhattan because I've probably easily walked that much in Manhattan. This was like you would walk to your office, or this is like a totally separate physical thing you would do?
It's a separate physical thing. I think I like having a good workout plan, but I moved in a recent time frame, so I don't have a gym. So right now, I would just set out a
Right.
3 miles away. I would walk there
Okay,
and
and then walk back. Oh,
yeah,
that's
and
interesting.
listen to music. But instead of doing that, instead I would now try to look at idioms on my phone, or I would
Yeah,
try to.
that's what I was thinking. Right. Listen to podcasts or whatever. Really, yeah, that's totally easy to do as long as you don't run into a pole or a person. You're good. And it's funny too because like there's actually a problem in the official guide of Bob walking in a parking lot, and I always tell people, you probably know it actually, a rate question, and I'm always like, and people struggle with it sometimes, and I say, well, that's a very normal type of problem because imagine having to walk somewhere and find your halfway point and go back. Anyway, it's funny that you just said you map out 3 miles there and 3 miles back. Reminded me of the Bob problem, so I'm sure that was easy for you. Um, so yeah, anyway, if you can do that, do it. And some people may have to do some level of that anyway, even if your study plan is 6 months. Like you may not have to completely cut people out or completely cut out your social life. Like maybe you can reward yourself of a nice 2 week span of studying. But either way, you will have to push certain things aside. And yeah, even some of your physical things. If you are someone who goes to the gym, let's say 4 times a week, and you go to the gym for an hour and a half to 2 hours, like that's a lot of time. Um, Something else I like that you said, let's just say you're not doing 8 hours a day. I like that you said that you got up early and studied. I was always a big proponent of that. I really like that. Let's just say you're only putting in 2.5 hours a day. If you get up and do that, at least during the week, that means when you get back from work, your studying is done. So I imagine you felt like you accomplished something GMAT wise pretty well even before like stepping foot into the office.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the mornings, I think everyone tends to be a little bit sharper as well. After work, I would find myself making more silly mistakes and things like that just because you're exhausted. And I usually work like, 8 to 11 hours a day. So some days I think I probably got a little less than 8 hours of studying in. But at the end of that 11, it can be a lot harder to focus. So definitely recommend studying in the morning, but also just eating healthy. I think setting
Yes.
longer study time frame will benefit you greatly in that you can enjoy your life while you're studying. So you're not just having to let go of everything and burning yourself out with studying. If you can enjoy and be healthy and eat nutritious stuff and stay involved in social with your friends, I think you'll be better at studying because you'll have a more full life while you're doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Agreed. And understanding that there's a finite end to it.
Yeah.
And I guess we just kind of answered Arjun's question is how to find time to work. So you work from 10 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. That's late. So you got to get up early and study. I mean, the fact that you're not starting, and granted, look, that's a grind too. If you're done work at 11:30, you're probably not going to sleep until at least 12:30. But yeah, you're just gonna have to kind of grind and put the time in, and then obviously take advantage of the weekends. And those are the times, and I had to do this too, where like I would have rather been hanging out with my friends on the weekends. And I didn't. I actually would go to my office. Um, during the weekends where no one would be there to get out of my apartment to put in time for studying. So it's just a matter of like sitting down, thinking of your schedule, thinking about what fits into your life, and just making it happen. Because my guess is you're applying to M7 schools, so it's not like this was a um, small thing for you. Like you were really motivated to get a great score.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also say that another thing I'd recommend, if you can take your GMAT earlier in your MBA application process, I recommend that too, because I find that it can be very motivating, but it can also just be very eye opening. So if you realize and you get a great score, then that's amazing. And I found that after I got my score, I was a lot more excited about applying to schools because I felt like I have this great thing that I want to show off. And I feel like this can be something that can enhance my application. But let's say if you don't necessarily get the score that you want to have, that gives you some more time to figure out, well, how am I going to play up the other amazing things that I do? Maybe you do a lot of mentorship. I care a lot about social impact. Like maybe that's something that you would,
Right.
the other things that are, great about you that may not necessarily be your score, the earlier you have your exam out of the way, I guess you could say, the more times it gives you to really prepare about how you want to present yourself. So another benefit to getting it done early. In fact, I tell every one of my cousins, and I've got a lot of them, as many of them that are in college right now, if you're interested in the MBA, take the GMAT the summer before you start your full-time job, because
Right.
you will never get the 3 months of summertime freedom back. It's probably the best time that you could probably get this taken
Yeah.
care of flying.
Yep. And we have a bunch of students at TTP doing that now. I talked to a lot of them. In fact, I'm tutoring some of them. So, and back to that, like, what were some of the things in target test prep that you found like the most beneficial for you, as you were, gearing up to take this thing?
Good question. So I would say starting on the quant side because it's a little bit more straightforward. It sounds crazy to say everything, but in some ways, everything kind of played in. I think that the actual layout of drilling the questions, this was recommended to me from someone at my company, my undergrad. She's the one who actually introduced me to target test prep. That idea of really drilling questions until you're consistently getting them right, that made a huge difference because whenever I saw a problem, I never had a feeling of thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, where am I going to start? I always seeing a problem, I could immediately get to work because I would know what to do. And that happened just because I was so comfortable with any problem type that might come up because I felt like I had seen most of what I might expect to see on an exam. So I think that the rigor of the easy to medium hard level questions and the quantity of them that there are there, I think it really sets you up to feel very comfortable with the majority of the exam questions that you'd get in the quant section. And then the validation of that. So then they have the reviews every couple of lessons. Actually, I think
Yep.
every lesson have a review of the last
Yeah,
previous
well,
question.
there's two. There's two. There's the mission reviews, which are like the last four missions, and then we also have like the quiz reviews at the beginning of every mission, which is just a 10-question review. But yeah,
Yeah,
a different array of them for sure.
yeah, the thereof. I think both were very effective quant wise to help me stay up to date. And I didn't have as much time to do it, but I know that if I had spent a little bit more time studying, I would have absolutely done the. And I apologize, I don't know the exact name, but when you can make the quizzes and you choose the types of,
Custom tests. Yeah, custom tests. Yep.
I think that
Hmm.
that's great. I knew exactly what topics by the end I needed help on. I could see it in my scores, and so that would have
Right.
been a good practice. Just those.
Yeah, the custom tests are cool because you can choose verbal quant topics, as many questions as you want, and then yeah, boom, you take one of the tests. So yeah, it's a cool thing to do at the end of your prep for sure. And yeah, I mean the nice thing is, I mean people ask a lot about like how am I going to remember this stuff in week one, in week 12? But as you clearly mentioned, like we have a lot of that review baked into the study plan itself. So you don't have to do that. And it sounds like too, you were taking advantage of, like you mentioned, our idioms guide. I'm guessing you were looking at our equation guide. I'm guessing you probably used our flashcards and your error log. So it seems
Mhm.
like you were using a lot of the tools that we offer to keep things fresh. Because you can't like and it's just like in college, as you kind of alluded to, that you were following some of the best practices. If you're using a textbook, for example, and you need to do review, you don't want to have to go back to the textbook and reread it. You want to go off your notes or your flashcards. Same thing with the GMAT. So you want to keep a nice book of these things. So if you want to review something you did 4 weeks ago, you have it, whether it's in your flashcards or your airlog, whatever. So yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I know your timeline was a little bit truncated, but it sounds like you were using those tools as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the error log was big. I wish I could have spent more time reviewing it. As time got shorter, I couldn't review all of the questions that I was getting wrong. But I think any type of studying that you're doing, wherever you are, if you can at least keep track of the questions, if not the questions, the general topics in which,
Right.
just so that you need to refer back to that, I think that made a big difference quant wise. And I guess more on the verbal side, I did enjoy the lessons. I think that the concept mastery, I believe that they called questions that they have throughout, where you can,
Yes.
I thought those were great to apply while I'm learning. I think it kind of followed up my understanding. But what I will say on the verbal side is the quizzes were quite difficult in my opinion. I mean, I'm sure they're probably true to form, but for me, I struggled and I didn't perform well. But for me, what helped me there was repetition. So I would take them again. I'd check out the error log. I'd see what I did
Right.
wrong. And, because of the way that I was studying, I would forget what the questions were. And so every time I came back, it was like a new one. And I think that kind of helped me prepare because it also just got me to the questions that I really needed to focus on. And on test day, those are the same ones that I felt a little more confident answering than I probably wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, and you got a verbal 45, so that's a very, very good verbal score. And speaking of scores, I didn't ask you this, but what did you do with your practice exams? Now, we obviously recommend taking all six MBA.com ones. I'm guessing you didn't take all of them. Did you take any prior to your GMAT or okay?
I took all of them actually.
Oh, you
So
did. Oh,
yeah,
good. Okay.
the way I studied it, it actually really worked out. I couldn't really take days off because I had a lot going on work wise. But 4th of July, we ended up having a 5-day break. So I had the 1st to 5th off, and my exam was on the 6th. So between the 1st to the 5th, I took all 6 exams in that time frame. I tried to simulate the test environment time wise, break wise. I wasn't using my phone or anything to try and make it seem true to form. And I also
Right.
have down here, but I got a 730, a 740, 770, 780, 740, 740. So I expected to score at around a 730 because I thought, all right, well, I expect
Right.
that I perform better in this environment, and I'm assuming that real exam is going to be a little harder than this. But
Hmm.
that was my expectation going in. But I think that having that preparation, now of course you can do it on your own timeline, but having that preparation so close to the actual exam, it kind of just felt like when I was taking the exam was one more of my practice exams because I
Right.
felt so comfortable with that format and the layout, and I knew I was going to do quant first, verbal, and then the IR AWWA, like AWA. I just felt very comfortable with that layout, and in exam day, I think doing it that close to the end kind of helped me out, and it really also just highlighted once again the last couple of topics that I needed to study around those exams. So if I took the exam in the morning, I'd spend a couple hours in the evening studying the specific questions I was getting wrong.
Right. And that's big. I mean, you want to take full advantage of those practice exams. The data is huge. You take them obviously at the end of your studying, not in the middle. Um, and yeah, I mean, you did it quicker. For a lot of people, it's like a 3, 4, 5 week process. But again, if you're there, and you want to get through as many as you can to be fully prepared for test day. Um, so yeah, I mean, and obviously you performed probably about as good as you could on the real thing, given those scores. Yeah, I mean, if I were you, I would have thought around a 740, 750. Obviously, 770, much better. Well, better. I mean, they're all great scores, but yes, you performed at the high end of your range. Let's put it that way. Um, Couple other questions. This is an interesting one because you also studied after work, which you mentioned. Someone also has a really busy workday plus travel and training to study after work. I get that, especially when you tend not to score well. So basically, the question is, how do you stay motivated? Um, after that long day of work when you're studying.
That's a good point. I think there's definitely twofold answers. I think one, it was kind of a do or die attitude. I knew that this is something that I wanted to do. And so for me, there's a lot of intrinsic motivation to want to perform well because I knew I wanted to get my MBA. I know this is something that I'm very passionate about and it's going to help me get to my dream long-term career goal. And so because of that, I think it created a lot of intrinsic motivation. But I think outside of that, I tried to make it as reasonable as possible. So I would tell myself, okay, after 3 quizzes, I'll go on my phone for 10 minutes, or after 3 quizzes, I'll call my sister and I'll chat with
Right.
her about our day. But I would like kind of break in sections what I aim to have done in the day. But I was also just very, very fixed on what I wanted to get done. So like I showed you my squares. I was very clear that okay, today I'm going to
Right.
color it square, and I'm not going to bed until I do it. And so that kind
That's
of provided a
great.
lot of motivation because I wanted to go to sleep. I love sleep, huge fan. So because
That's sleep.
to
Makes
get
sense.
I would just basically, I don't know, make a promise to myself that I would do it. So I think the biggest thing is just if this is something that you're really passionate about, it's very easy to allow other things to get in the way of it. But as much as you can, if you are motivated, then you owe it to yourself to do the best that you can in the time that you have. And you owe it to yourself to try to perform the best that you can. So sometimes I think the motivation just has to come from within.
Yeah, and if you put in those breaks, you have to know, like, okay, I can't extend the breaks. The breaks have to essentially end, and then I got to get back to my prep. So yeah, I mean, it's all kind of personable about or personal about what you do and how you do that. But yes, you do need to find that motivation from within. Another question is, did you have some someone's wondering about your strategy in the exam. I doubt that you were picking and choosing what questions to answer. I'm assuming that you attempted all the questions, and obviously, if there's something you had to take a guess on, you would do it, and then you'd keep moving on. Is that pretty accurate?
Yes, yeah, that was it. My goal going in was not to really, well, not to skip questions because I think I had a hard time gauging what was really worth a skip. So I would just give something my best shot, and if I got to an answer that resembled something that was one of the questions, I would choose that. But for the
Right.
most part, I did relatively well. Well, I would say, well, I did quant first. I think quant went really well for me, and because of that, I was very verbal section because I was just very excited. But for
Right.
quant, I didn't feel the need to skip anything because I was doing well on time. And so in the beginning, I think I was probably going a little bit faster than I needed to, but it banked me time towards the end when I was getting some of those harder questions to actually solve them. So I didn't really feel the need to skip. I think I might have skipped one and just guessed it, but for the most part, I didn't feel the need to do that with quant. In verbal, I will say though, I would say I hit a little bit of a slump because when I started taking it, the reading comprehension questions were very challenging. And so because of that, I got a little bit demotivated. Usually, reading comprehension is good because I practiced the theory. I think Target Tester might have shared it, where you have to try to get interested in what you're reading. So for the most
Yes. Yep.
I was interested in the readings. It is very interesting. Sometimes I still spit out a fact that I learned during those exams. I hope they're right because I've been telling people the
I
things
think
that
they're right. Yeah, I think they're right.
but there's a lot of interesting stuff about astronomy and animals and things like that. And for the most part, I could get interested in it. But I found that once I was struggling with the questions, it kind of helped me lose motivation essentially. So about halfway through, I was definitely falling a little behind on time and I was getting a little sad. But at that point, I kind of just turned it around by telling myself, I'll give myself a pep talk by saying, you got to get this exam done. So give it your best. You
Yeah.
don't want to leave
Right.
anything. You don't want to leave anything on the table and feel like you didn't try. So I just went full force for the last set of questions and I turned out okay. But what I will say about also just strategies, I think that there's a lot of information out there that people will say, I remember for quant, a common adage is like, you have to get the first 15 or 20 questions right to score well. And that can
Right.
get in your day. Well, I got one of the first few questions wrong for sure, if not two, and I scored
Hmm.
fine. So there's common wisdom out there about things that you can and should be doing, but you shouldn't allow how you're doing in the moment to get in the way of how you're performing. Because it's very easy to get in your head about, oh, am I getting hard enough questions
Yeah.
to get a higher score because I need to be scoring well on hard questions. In the moment, it's very hard to gauge. I'm sure what I thought in the moment was a very easy question might have been a lot harder than I thought, and I was just being
Yep.
very hard on myself. So I think in the actual exam, as much as you can just kind of try to let those thoughts go and just keep it pure to what you're trying to answer, I think that will help you a lot with timing and then also just with motivation in general.
Yeah, and if you have the wherewithal or ability to know the difficulty in real time, then you're probably going to crush the GMAT anyway. It's a really difficult thing, and then you've got experimental questions. No one truly knows the algorithm. I mean, the algorithm can do things that you wouldn't expect. So, yeah, I would say exactly. Don't try to do that stuff to yourself. It's just going to make it for a longer day. And as you said, you got a few things wrong, but you stayed positive. You were steadfast. You knew you had to continue to go through the test because what's the point of giving up? You may not know. And then if you do give up and you don't score well, you maybe missed out on an opportunity to do really, really well. And remember, everybody, this is coming from someone who scored a 770. So, she didn't feel like she was doing that great in the test, and then all of a sudden she gets a 770. So that should be something for you all to think about in understanding that when you're in the GMAT, if you go in and you feel prepared enough, like you can get a great score, even if something seems to be going wrong, like just block it out and move to the next question and the next question and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I just
Uh,
want. Oh, sorry.
no, keep going.
No worries. I know something that is very common that folks will say is that they're bad test takers and they can't perform in a testing environment. But for
Hmm.
me, what it comes down to is it's just how anxious you are and how confident you feel. So growing up, my dad would always tell me, he's like, just, be confident. He's like, you know what you're doing. Why would you go to the test and feel nervous? And that didn't really help me because I would still be nervous when I would go into the
Right.
exam. But I think the big thing is if you prepare and you feel like you did everything you can and you put the cards on the table, it helps a lot in terms of feeling confident. But I also think that you shouldn't underestimate coming up with techniques and having ways to kind of combat the anxiety in real times. I know things about people talk about meditation, people talk about I gave myself a pep talk in the Uber right over to the exam center where
Yep.
I won't lie, I compared myself to Michael in game 6. Like I was trying to do whatever I can
Oh,
to make
nice.
excited and motivated. In the breaks, I would do jumping jacks and I would eat like a granola bar to give myself energy and try to stay positive. I think that you can't really underestimate how important it is just to keep your mindset as positive as possible and just have faith in your own abilities. The more that you doubt yourself, the worse that you're going to perform. So
Hmm.
you can't always guarantee that you're going to get an amazing score, but you can always guarantee that you try your hardest.
Yeah, agreed. Where'd you do jumping jacks?
In the bathroom.
Oh, okay. I was wondering. I was like, was it in the waiting room? And people were like, why is she doing jumping jacks? I figured it was somewhere like, like in the hallway or something. Yeah, no, it's good. You do need to keep up high levels of energy and motivation because it is a draining test. Um, so yeah, this is all really, really great advice. Is there any, I mean, I feel like we answered most of the questions, and some of your questions were already embedded into things that Preeti mentioned. Um, does anyone have any last questions? I think this has been a great overview of your journey and stuff like that. Just seeing if there's any last questions that need to be asked. Um, and if not, we can let you go. It seems like there are not any additional questions. Unless you have some final thoughts, I'm happy to have you give them.
I do. I do have
Oh,
some
good,
here.
good.
So the first thing I will say though, and it's kind of contrary to what I'm doing here, talking about my experience, is I think that you should really take things that you see online with a grain of salt. And I find a lot of times getting into the MBA process, not even just GMAT, the overall MBA process, there's a lot of information out there, whether it's the Reddit threads, whether it's the forums that you can see out there. And I think that there's a lot that can be learned from that. Absolutely. It's a great way to generate knowledge and information to keep in your back pocket. But I also think it's very important to run your own race. So my one big piece of feedback coming out of this would be, yes, it's great to hear what everybody else did and how they perform well. But the reality of it is everyone else's strategies may not work for you. So you owe it to yourself to just kind of figure out what works best for you and follow that, even if it may not necessarily be what conventional wisdom is. Kind of like what I did my 4-week journey. If you've got something else
Yep.
that is unusual and might work for you, I just recommend not listening to the background noise and focus on what does well for you. And like I said, doing whatever you can to feel like you push yourself. So that would be my big piece of advice. And also I wanted to offer, if anyone wants to reach out, you absolutely can. I
Oh, good.
usually don't ever ignore anyone who reaches out to me. So yeah, feel free to message me if you all need any, want to talk or anything like that. I'm always there to chat.
Awesome. Yeah, well, this was great. This is amazing advice. I think anyone watching this now or in the future will gain a ton from everything that you said, regardless of your starting point. Like Preeti showed, like some really great methods and discipline and how she did her prep. So I want to thank you again for doing this. This was awesome. Hopefully, everyone here gained some new knowledge for their GMAT prep journey. As Preeti said, feel free to reach out to her. You guys can also always reach out to us over at TTP, including myself. So thank you again, everybody. Have a good week, health safe week, and enjoy the journey. So we'll talk to everybody soon. And thanks again, Preeti.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Bye, all.
Okay, bye, everybody.